everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Luli Health Podcast. My name is Grace Youngson. I'm the founder of Luli Health, and I'm so excited today to have my good friend Raquita with me on the show. Thank you so much for coming on, Raquita.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Yes, today we're actually going to be talking about pornography and just your story, and I think that so many people will relate to this, but we're going to be having an honest, raw, real conversation about the effects of pornography. So before we get into that, Raquita, would you just share with the audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so right now I am a professional singer, and I'm also a choir vocal coach at a public charter school here in Woodland Park. And that's what I'm doing. That's what I do. And it's really an amazing thing to pour into the next generation of creatives. And so I'm excited about it.
Absolutely. That sounds so amazing. And you have so many different things going on. I love it so much. So could you share with us a little bit about your first exposure to porn and how that affected you?
Yeah, I was actually 9 years old, and started very, very early. It was one of those, the way I can remember it is like going to sleep innocent and then waking up the next day and your innocence is gone. But it was a stepfather who introduced it to me at 9. And it was also a molestation that happened the same day. So it was all at once. So not only are you showing me images, but there's also feeling attached to it, you know? And so that was the introduction to pornography for me. Started at a very, very early age. And then it progressed because there was never really any resolve with that, you know, with that abuse. There was never any resolve. He remained around for a few years after that and continued to do it. So it was never resolved. And I remember going into middle school and really still struggling with that. And it actually became like a coping mechanism, because you have to think about how sacred sex is and what it was created for and who it was intended for. And then when you go outside of that, there's still the feeling that these are hormones, emotions, and feelings that are activated before their time. Does that make sense? And so even though what is happening to me is wrong, there was no reconciliation between what was happening and why does it feel good, you know? And so it became just like a coping mechanism for years, just for years. If I was stressed out, if I was anxious about anything, if I, it was like something that I ran to. It was just me, me trying to figure out life, me trying to cope, and it was just all about me. And that's what pornography kind of effects of it. It just kind of feeds that self-gratification,
I think that's so interesting that you talked about it being a coping mechanism, because I think that's what it is for many people. And that can be the tough part of feeling like that something is kind of bad for you, almost like having an alcohol addiction, but you also don't know how to live without it. But at the same time, when you do come out of it, and I've spoken to different people who have shared with me, when they've struggled with a porn addiction and they kind of feel like, oh my goodness, I'm going to lose my coping mechanism. But when they actually come out on the other side and they do make it out of that, they now feel like they actually found their lives. They didn't lose them. And so I think that's so interesting. And I think that our society, unfortunately, is very, very cultured, especially, well, women and men, but to have all these coping mechanisms rather than actually dealing with deeper issues, you know?
Correct.
So I would love to hear a little bit more of your thoughts about how that affected your relationships and your self-worth moving forward.
Well, you have to think of it this way too. When you're that young and it's a family member, right? You don't feel protected. You don't feel like anybody was there for you. You feel kind of abandoned in a sense. And so that abandonment, it affected every other relationship after that. That feeling of abandonment, the feeling of rejection. Am I not worth protecting? Right? So if they don't believe me, then nobody outside of my family is going to believe me, right? So I'm not worth protecting. I'm not worth comfort or validation, or you know what I mean? So it affected every area of my life. Now, I had music, right? So it was like an escape for me to be involved with anything that had something to do with music. I would completely lose myself in a song that I felt like spoke to my pain, you know, and this is, you know, middle school, high school. I was boy crazy, you know, because like I said, there's a feeling attached to this that feels good. And it's supposed to feel good. You know what I mean? Like it was created to be pleasurable. But I was seeking it now, like, well, the person who did this to me, that was wrong. But the boyfriend at school, this is okay. And it still was not okay, you know, but I didn't know that. I didn't know how to deal with that. There was no therapy. There was no counseling. Like there was nothing. It was just, hey, if that happened, if it didn't happen, we're just not going to talk about it. Go on with your life. That was what it was. And so it affected all of my, you know, not so much my friendships, but my girlfriend, boyfriend relationships. I would say I would settle, you know, like I would just settle because it was something similar. There were times, you know, when I was being abused by a boyfriend and I just would get numb, right? Because I'm just trying to cope. I'm just trying to cope. Yeah. So I'm telling you, this was between the age 9 to 19.
Wow.
That's what we're talking about right now. After 19, everything changed, you know, but during that time, my relationships were affected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it's interesting that you mentioned it's like, you were kind of told, you know, okay, just forget about what happened. Mm-hmm. And I think many times we try and bottle things up, or we go through things in life and we say, okay, whatever, like I don't have time to deal with that emotional baggage. Let me just move on. And it's actually not possible to do that. And I think for anyone who's listening, if you've ever dealt with a porn addiction, or even if it wasn't a full-blown addiction, but you were involved in viewing that or whatever that looks like, or even you were in an unhealthy relationship, it is so important to actually recognize that this affects us and to take that time to heal. And especially, I think porn is extremely objectifying of people. And that really alters our perception of our value and our worth. And that's why we want to settle, or we'll settle for less, because we think that we're only worth that.
That's right.
And so that's when you have to take that time to reframe your understanding of your self-worth and actually heal. So I'm so glad that you brought that up, Raquita. I know you had mentioned in a conversation we'd had before about, I would love to get into a little bit more of this, just the objectification side of this, that, you know, for you, it almost became where you started seeing people just for their sexuality. Because that's the way you had been seen. Can you shed a bit more light on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, like I said, those relationships in school, the middle school, high school relationships, and a little bit past that, that's all I felt like I was worth. So that became a game for me with the opposite sex, like it just became like a game. It was like, love is not real, people caring about you and respecting your body is just, who does that? Nobody does that. And I just didn't think it existed. And so that's what I mean. Like, it's just, it just affected the way I saw relationships and affected the way that I communicated in my relationships. When you go through something like that, especially when it comes to pornography, you don't want, I didn't want the person who introduced me to pornography to touch me anymore. You know what I mean? But it was the images that created like a craving. I want that touch. I want what I see, just not from that person, And so now there's no real meaningful relationship. And not only that, but you kind of learn to manipulate in a sense, for things to work out in your favor. Rejection and abandonment will cause somebody to learn the art of manipulation, and because they don't trust anybody. And so that's another way that I would, be in my relationships. You would never get the real me. The real me? Oh, no. So it was always that constant, it was just fake. Everything was just fake.
Yeah, and I think that has a lot to say for how porn is fake. And in our culture, it's being like so normalized, and it's putting so much pressure on women to perform or look a certain way, but it's also creating this huge like concept of love that is a total fake and so far removed from what it actually is. And I think that to me is one of the most sad things, because it's like in society we're not experiencing all that love can really be. And so I know that now you're happily married and you have a great marriage and an amazing husband, and I would love it if you would share a bit of how that looks different, because sometimes in culture we're told, oh, go be free, sleep with a bunch of people and experience your sexuality and all these things. What's wrong with that? Why doesn't that really produce satisfaction? And how is marriage different?
Well, the whole societal ideology about being free with your body, people don't realize how spiritual sex is. They don't realize that it is a spiritual transaction, and your mind, your will, your emotions, your soul is impacted a great deal, because we were really created for companionship. We were created for love and healthy relationships. I mean, every human, no matter what faith you belong to, every human craves that. And I think pornography is just an overindulgence of that craving for connection with people. And I think you just don't even realize that the more you connect with so many people, it is damaging your soul. It's damaging. And I will put money on, I'd be willing to bet that any woman who's out there doing that is not satisfied, is not content. I would argue that they're not, because deep down on the inside, I would play these games with these guys, get what I wanted, and feel like trash at the end of the day. And then what else happens? Now you're already addicted to porn. You're already addicted to that kind of touch and that kind of activity. So to numb that, what do? You might turn to alcohol. You might turn to drugs. This is just like a gateway. Pornography is just a gateway for other addictions, because your humanness, your human flesh is just never satisfied. It's never satisfied. And so the beauty of, for me, the beauty was in allowing Jesus to come into my heart and show me who I was and show me my worth. That's my journey. And that's the only reason that I can have a healthy marriage. It's the only reason that I can be married to somebody who never saw me based on what I had done. Right? He never saw me based on what I had done. He never saw me based on who I was before I met him. It was the total transformation that happened with me on my spiritual journey, my faith journey, that allowed me to see that there's a such thing as a healthy relationship. And so those things are behind me. I don't think about them unless somebody asks me a question, kind of like the podcast, right? So it's not a constant thought. It's not something that I'm living in. I don't live in fear of not enjoying my husband because of where I was. I don't have that on me. You know what I mean? Like I'm really free because there's somebody who not only respects my body, but respected my spirit. He respected my soul enough to encourage me, to restore me, to even minister to those broken parts, you know? And so that was one of the reasons why I'm like, oh my God, so there is somebody out there who can love me that way and not necessarily want anything transactional.
I love that so much.
Yeah, we were friends. We were friends first, and it was not he didn't want anything from me, but just to love me, you know, help me heal in those broken areas. And at that point that I realized I don't have to settle anymore. Like this could be my love. And I went for it. I was like, nobody else is going to get this guy. So I'm very happy and I'm very whole.
Yeah, I think, wow, you touched on so many things that I would love to talk about a little bit more. I think just talking, you know, as women, we're made for, as humans, men and women, we're made for committed love. We're not made for casual love.
Yes.
And when we're sold the fake of casual love, it really screws us up because that's not how we're made to connect.
Correct.
And I think what's so beautiful as well, I wanted to touch on a couple things. One thing is also men are often demonized in this side of things. And I love the fact that your story is about a man who didn't see you that way, who saw you for, you know, you as a whole person. Pornography just makes it about our sexuality. Right. And he was such a good, strong man and loved you where you were at and also encouraged you to be healthy. Yeah. And I just think that's such a beautiful picture. But I also wanted to touch on, I know you had told me before that you actually felt like you only really truly experienced what sex was in its fullness once you were married. Could you touch a bit more on that and why that is?
Well, it is exactly what we just mentioned. It was because he saw me. It wasn't just my body. You know what I mean? And he waited. We waited. So it wasn't like, let's just screw around before we get married and test drive and see what it's like. It wasn't like that, you know, but it was worth the wait. I had never been waited on. And I had never waited on anyone. You want what you want, you get what you want, and we get it done, and that's that. It was very transactional. Sex in a covenant, in a marriage, between two people who are not objectifying the other person. Again, that spiritual transaction is now healthy. It's now healthy. There's no, I want to do this like I saw in the video, or it's not like that. It is the freedom to explore the body that you're joined together with now, with no shame and no guilt and no pressure to perform. And it's literally just the pleasure that it was created to be. And that's the difference. And there's no guilt attached to it. There's no shame attached to it after it's done. You know, you don't feel like trash when it's done. And so that's the difference.
That's so good, Raquita. I think something else that you mentioned right at the beginning was about, when you were engaging in it before, it was very much self-gratification.
Oh, yeah.
It was very much self-focused. And I think that when you're in that committed, healthy relationship, that is not transactional or self-focused. You're actually focused on how am I pleasing the other person?
Absolutely.
How am I loving them? You're actually caring for them as a whole person, rather than just seeing them as a transaction. And I think that is really what it comes back to, and I hope that for women listening to this podcast that you're encouraged. I also love what you said, Raquita. Porn makes us believe that true love doesn't exist anymore. It literally kills true love. And I hope that every woman listening has been inspired by your story that yes, true love does exist for you. Beautiful, committed, healthy love does exist for you. Don't let porn lie to you that isn't true. Don't let things that have happened to you in the past define your future worth and value and relationships. So, I just really want to encourage women on that and know that your feelings are valid. When society tells you, oh no, it's just normal to be casual, you shouldn't be feeling all these emotions about that. No, it's not normal to be casual. It's normal to be committed. So thank you so much for sharing.
You're so welcome.
I know that we have to do another one of these soon and expand on it a little bit more. And to our audience, if you have any specific questions for Raquita in the future, please drop them in the comments and we can see about answering them. But very last thing, Raquita, what would be your top piece of advice for someone? And this isn't even talked about. We always a lot of times see it as a man's issue, porn addiction. But what about women? A woman who is navigating that, what is your advice for coming out of that?
Realizing that you're worth more than what you're watching and what you're engaging in, and that you really should probably get some healthy girlfriend relationships. Like, I know I have some friends who I can phone a friend if I ever have a weak moment. But I think having healthy friendships and having people around you who can remind you that you're worth more than that. I think that's what, that's one of the things that helped me. And then I mentioned earlier, my spiritual path, my spiritual journey. I believe that is probably the ultimate way. But if you choose not to do that way, hey, up to you. But I would say, find you some spiritual nourishment. And find you a good group of friends who love you, care about you, and want to see the best for you. They always say that you can tell a person's future by the 5 people that they hang around. I'm probably saying that wrong. But it's like if you have a desire to be a certain way, but you just feel like you're unworthy of that, I would propose that you go find people who are doing what you would like to do. And who are not engaging in those things, and see how they live their lives. Learn from those people. So that those are my top. I would say top 2.
That's so good, Raquita. I totally agree that your life is determined by the people that you're around, because we are masters of our future, but we're also products of the environment that we surround ourselves with. And
you can change your environment.
Yes, exactly. It matters what you're allowing to speak to you, what you're seeing and who you're around. And I think that is such a huge thing. Community, healthy community is so important to be healthy. So I absolutely love that, Raquita. Thank you so much for sharing and for sharing some of your personal story. I so appreciate it. You are amazing. Thank you everyone for listening. We release a new podcast every week. And so be sure to subscribe and follow us and share with your friends, and we will see you next time.